Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1118th New Social Environment. I'm Magali, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Lee Mary Manning and Jean Dykstra. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Photographer Lee Mary Manning models the method of close and care-filled looking through carefully arranged juxtapositions of 35mm analog prints. Taking familiar objects and scenes as their subject matter, Manning's photos picture people, nature, the street, and everything in between. Conceptualizing paying attention as a practice of being alive, the artist insists on the importance and meaning of quiet moments and humdrum things that might initially seem unremarkable. And our host today, photography critic Jean Dykstra, is a former editor for Photograph magazine. She has contributed to the Brooklyn Rail, Art in America, Dear Dave, and the New York Review of Books, among other publications. Dykstra has also written essays for numerous photography books, including Running, Falling, Flying, Floating, Crawling, and A Trilogy by Jessica Backhaus. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jean to get us started.
Thanks, Magley. And thanks for all your help. And hello, everybody. It's nice to see you all and glad you all could join us. I'm really excited to see Lee Mary Manning's show upcoming at Canada Gallery in November. We are not going to discuss specifically the works in that show this afternoon, just so that everybody can sort of see them for the first time at Canada when the show opens. But we're going to be discussing a lot of Lee's recent works and sort of her career in general. So, Lee, the first thing I wanted to ask you about, you published a book last year called Grace is Like New Music. And first of all, I love the title. And it kind of gets at your work's relationship to music and poetry and dance. And it also nods to something else about your work that I love, which is it has this sort of elliptical character. Meaning is created, sort of indirectly and through the connections between photographs of sort of ordinary things. So first, I was wondering if you wanted to say something about the book and how that came about. And then if you wanted to just maybe talk a little bit about some of how those things find their way into your work, those other things like music and dance and poetry.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, I'm really happy to be talking to you, and thanks for having me, Brooklyn Rail. Yeah, how the book came to be. I mean, in 2021, I suppose, when I knew I was going to be in preparation for making a show the following year, I set about I thought I would make a publication and a show at the same time. And I kind of quickly realized that the book was going to be like far more vast, and the book had no deadline, and the show did. And so I kind of quickly pivoted, and fortunately, just after the show in 2022, at Canada also called Ambient Music. I was invited to do a residency, which was the most absolutely perfect opportunity to like sequence the book, So it was my first ever residency, and I spent the 5 weeks there sequencing the book, and it turned out to be, I guess the parameter I'd set for myself was around 10 years before 2022. In 2012, I had picked up my analog cameras again and started making analog work, and then started showing work in 2014 using those analog cameras. And so I had this decade of images, and that was the idea. That was kind of the only parameter for the book, that was just to sort of let loose all of these photographs in one kind of volume, and set about to do it more as like an art book, as opposed to like showcasing specific works or specific images. So really thinking about, you mentioned the elliptical and the title, and like how the other influences come into play. Like when I think of like my preoccupations, like music and poetry and choreography and dance, to sort of set those photographs, page to page to page, in this sort of dance of shapes and volume, and kind of like moving through the pages with no sense of, there's actually a few segments of the book that do have like themes, but I just set about to make the book purely on my own kind of intuitive rhythm of what the images meant. And I wanted no sense of time and no sense of like, even, the only argument I got into with the designer was like no page numbers, because I wanted you to be able to just like open the book at any point and go any direction, and kind of almost like a choose your own adventure feeling. But I guess like the choreography of the steps of where the images, they kind of dance around the page in these shapes, and occasionally they're like punctuated with like, we played with certain, arrangements. Yeah, I feel like that's the book question. I may have also answered a bit to the other influences.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering if maybe we want to show one of the images, maybe the first image from the slideshow. Yeah, because one of the things that really intrigues me, I feel like in some of your images that the notion of dance or music or poetry, the references are maybe a little bit more direct, like in this one, right? Arcobaleni, is that rainbow in Italian?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah. So in and not the title, but I mean, you can see a dance troupe performing here in this one, and then in other ones, it's just sort of a little more folded in, and it's just you get a sense that there's like a rhythm and a poetry sort of inherent in the way you put the works together. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe you want to talk about this piece a little bit.
I'd love to, yeah. This particular work was made at the invitation of the Festival of Two Worlds in Spoleto, Italy. And that festival occurs every summer for like the last, I think, 60 years. It was primarily an opera festival, and it had a sister festival that occurs in Charleston, South Carolina. And now I believe it only occurs in Spoleto. But my residency was in this small town outside of Rome. And the residency is the two estates of Anna Mahler and Saul LeWitt, who both had significant time in their practices in Spoleto. And so, that was where I went and I made the book, but I spent, 5 weeks there and had my camera with me throughout. And, very fortunate to get invited the following summer to make a show for the festival, using all of the work I made when I was in Spoleto. So this is one of the performances at the festival in 2022, and this is Trisha Brown Company. And the paper, I was really transfixed with this like beautiful art supply store in Spoleto that just had all this like really rad dead stock, everything art ephemera, like papers and old notebooks and organizers, and so a lot of that stuff came home with me, and I played with a lot of it actually in the studio as I was kind of assembling the book. I would sort of take breaks and play around with that material. So that's how that ended up, a little scrap of that in Arcobaleno.
Yeah. The other thing that I love about your work, and especially in this moment, I feel like is it's very observational and at its heart about paying attention. And I feel like that sounds like a really simple thing, paying attention, but it really is not. And I think it's harder and harder every moment. And there's so many distractions, and just our brains get filled with all of those distractions. So maybe we could go to the next image. Yeah, I love this image. And maybe the next one. Yeah, this is the one I wanted to talk about. I love this, that there's this box of pears just sort of nestled beautifully together. And then there's an image of these 3 baskets, and then maybe what looks like straw hats on a restaurant wall. I'm not quite sure, but I think so many people would just walk by any of these things without stopping to notice them. And so I'm wondering, when you go out kind of into the world with your camera, how do you know what makes you pick up your camera to take a picture of something? Do you go out? Do you feel like you have to be sort of in the right frame of mind to go out and take pictures? Do you feel maybe like your mind has to be really empty or clear to go out? Like, what is that like?
Yeah, I mean, I think like there was a time before, like, we had cell phones, and there was a time of just like actually having a camera as a way to kind of record, like if you were traveling or if you went out to a party or something, you would have your camera in your pocket. And so I think I was just like, maybe generationally, like more alert to just wanting to record and have proof of like going somewhere or seeing something. And like the decision, it's really hard to answer like what, what drives me to take out my camera and make an image, because I don't know if there's a particular answer to that impulse, but it's like, I know that I can say for sure, I don't set about like today's Friday, today's my camera day, I go out for a walk, I look for things. Like, it never works like that. I know some photographers do work like that, and I always admire that. And sometimes I see photographers that I know and love their work, and I see them and I know they're out working. They've got they're strapped, they're walking around the city. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool. But mine's a little smaller, like it's usually something like this, and the impulse is just simply that, it's like,
Yeah.
something I regard as pretty. Like, I mean, the pears, that was at Broadway Market in London in 2017, I think. Actually made that print many years back, and then it lived by itself for a while. And then the redux in the title is when I added the 2 additional photos, which were each from different trips to London. And High Hopes being a reference to one of my favorite Mike Leigh films. But yeah, I think
you titled a picture Mike Leigh, didn't you? Don't you have a picture just titled?
Like there's probably like 25 different Mike Leigh references in my titles.
I'm such a fan of his.
Yeah, he's like totally like masterful
Yeah.
humanist. But yeah, and I mean, I think sometimes the flow is there. Like I feel really like maybe light will affect me, like particularly even just like, really crispy winter light or like, I don't know. It's really hard. It's very like ephemeral, like what makes me kind of in the flow and not in the flow.
Yeah. Yeah. And then once you are back in your studio with all these pictures, like how does that process work for you in terms of making compositions, putting things together? Is it kind of it seems like it must be sort of intuitive and sort of free flowing. What is that like for you?
Both of those words totally apply. I mean, when I had one of my first studios, uh, it was um, it was with a group of other artists, and a couple of them were also photographers. It's actually like one of them was um, Sarah Swinar, whose show I just saw across the street. And they had each like taken sheet metal and drilled it to their walls and just used magnets. And I took that as a as a way to go about seeing all these images at once. And so I had for a time I had this studio where I could just magnetize all these 3.5 by 5 images, and then yeah, the sort of intuitive pull of like maybe there's like a sort of really overt relationship that makes sense, like color or shape, or maybe it's like way weirder and only makes sense to me, and then later somebody will say it makes sense to them in a totally different way, and I'll be like, oh, that too, like it's and then lately I've moved into having my studio in my apartment, and now um I've been working like flat. I've been working on tables for the last probably 2.5 years. And I like that as well a lot. I I play cards by myself a lot. Like I play solitaire with actual cards. And it feels like setting out the cards, like and I'm just kind of like pulling from them and shuffling through them, and like and so those relationships I don't yeah, I work really intuitively, and also kind of quickly. I don't like to linger too long on like a decision that's just like, oh, I like that, like I just luckily am able to commit fairly easily.
Yeah.
Don't change my mind very much when it comes to those like arrangements.
I want to ask you about something, but I want to make a comment on the following picture, I think, first, if we could go to the next picture. I can't tell you how much I love this picture. And I'm not even sure I can articulate why, but it's just beautiful. But there's also this combination of these leaves, and then it's the windshield of a car, right? So it's this some combination of nature and mechanical, and you can sort of look at it quickly and not quite know what you're looking at, but it's so seasonal. I don't know. I just love everything about this picture. And I was wondering what, well, first of all, if you want to say anything about the picture, but also, is there anything, what makes you decide that? Because it seems kind of rare that you have one image take up the whole frame. So maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, first of all, thanks for those kind words about this piece. I mean, this piece is really special to me. It was like yeah, it's just made during like a tremendously heavy period of time. Like I think I was meant to do something for one of the art fairs that got, suddenly put online. And so it just became you know, that in itself decided it was going to be a single image, like, but it's an odd, like, there's not really like a set of rules for what makes something just okay to live by itself. And I like that, even as I like assemble like arrangements of things, like, I like this idea that over time I can pull out an image from within that work and have that stand alone as a single image. It just feels like every once in a while, for me personally, it's like taking a breath and just having like one image. And it's not that, you know, for a while I was like thinking like, why am I like more reluctant to like use one image? And yeah, I'm not sure how I totally define like my reasoning there, but
Yeah.
they just kind of, the images themselves sort of like dictate that to me at various times, you know, like even thinking of the show upcoming, there's only two sort of standalone images. And I'm always, even in my mind, I'm always like, why that one?
Well, it sounds like you kind of use your own work as an archive a little bit that you draw from and play with,
Yeah, that's true, actually.
which is cool. It's interesting. Maybe we can go to the next image. What led you to sort of use kind of, you know, snapshot size, analog? Where do you get them printed?
I have this like beloved mom and pop place that I work with I call them mini labs. And typically across the city, the smallest print that you can get is 4x6, and they're one of the only labs that I found that'll do the 3.5x5, which is the, you know, truly, for me anyway, handheld.
Yeah.
And yeah, they used to be on Bleecker Street. They're called Bleecker Digital. Now they're on Kenmare Street. And they have been.
Well, yeah. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to sort of use the snap? Because there's something about them, that size, that makes it feel very accessible, even though the compositions, the larger compositions, are actually, you know, really sophisticated and you know, not inaccessible, but sort of like we were saying before, kind of elliptical and elusive and poetic. And it's not, you know, you can sort of make your own narratives and draw your own conclusions and see your own connections between things. So what made you decide to use that kind of format and those size images?
I think in, you know, in the era of photo blogs and Tumblr accounts, image-based, there was like a heyday in the mid 2000s, and I was really inspired to keep one of those photo blogs because I had like started traveling for work, and it felt suddenly like, you know, a camera to take with you to became even smaller, like it would fit in your, you know, shirt book. It was like the size of a credit card or an iPhone. And so I started keeping one of these photo blogs, and the format that I also, you know, sort of copied and adjusted to my own aesthetic was just image, 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 image. And I would update this post. I would do a post every day, usually in the mornings. And I started, you know, it'd be sometimes 20 pictures, sometimes 5, sometimes 40, but it was every day. And so you're doing this like sort of scroll, this edit of images, kind of you're not creating shape, but you're sort of telling a story with these series, the sequence of images. And when I started making work outside of, really that photo blog gave me it set in motion, like the invitation to start making publications and the invitation to make work inside of like fine art space and framed work. And so as I was kind of like moving into that territory, I thought like, because I had also picked up my analog cameras again and had started amassing these stacks of 3.5 by 5 images, the first time I made an assemblage like this was my first show with Canada in 2018 called Love. And it was the first time I'd, done that. And it felt like this really subtle jump, because there were a few spots in between from the blog to this type of arrangement. But it was like the sort of closest I could get to sort of creating that sequence, almost like an experimental film of just like image, 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 and have it be, more elegant or more, formal, I guess, to kind of set it into a frame and work with a printer and a framer and really like emphasize, I guess.
Do you still keep, was it called Unchanging Window? Was that then?
Yeah, it still lives online. I don't ever update it anymore, but I'm always really relieved that it's still there when I go to check it.
Yeah. Is it something that do you use Instagram in a way that you maybe used to use the blog, or is it an entirely different kind of thing?
No, I mean, I think to me it feels like very much the same thing. And like I've really joked that like Unchanging Window was like my, it was Instagram for me.
Yeah.
And so I've always felt really like like really comfortable in like, especially once Instagram started to allow you to create carousels of images. I was like, oh, here we go. Just like I'd already been doing that for around 8 or 9 years or something prior to that. So and the only reason Unchanging Window kind of went dormant, still possible to get reactivated because I never know when Instagram's gonna just go away, but which would be fine. But it felt like the world of image blogs and Tumblrs had just sort of like evaporated. Like no one was left in the building. I might have been like the last person in the building being like, guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. There was a huge explosion for a while of it. And
yeah.
yeah.
And so I was a little, I mean, I was probably vocal, but I was a little reluctant to join Instagram. And then I just finally was like, okay, yeah, everybody's here. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Well, sort of in contrast, I think to Instagram and everything online, you've talked about using some of the photographs that you use in your works about not being precious about them, about not minding if they're fingerprints and not minding if they're dust on the lens or something like that. Maybe we can go to the next image. Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I was wondering if there was any part of that was sort of a reaction, against digital photography and Photoshop and even AI and things like that, but a reaction a little bit away from that and towards something more kind of, not handmade exactly, but sort of showing the marks of the equipment that you're using.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's funny, like I haven't even really wrapped my head around the AI piece yet, but definitely like the objectness of going back to analog had everything to do with like a sort of, I don't know, like a sort of reaction of like the digital space just always felt so yeah, like fraught, like with this, like getting the next program, having the newest model of the next camera. All the cameras that I'm sort of working with now are mostly, 20, 30 years old, and they're working just fine. And, I get film developed, I get negatives, I can make prints, and like I definitely owe a lot to like using digital cameras for so many of those, all those blog years was just going through a series of little Canon G series. And, I used Lightroom, and I would, in the camera, in the Canon, I would zoom, and, so there's tons of close-ups, and I would crop, and I would do all this stuff. And like, moving to analog just meant like I have one shot. Like I've got, if there's something happening right in front of me, maybe I'll get two chances to take a picture of it, and probably just one. And if I'm zooming in on something, I physically have to get close to that thing, um
Like this picture.
like this picture, I'm standing right next to my friend Will, as a matter of fact. And so all of that did feel like a little bit of a reaction, like, because I'm a bit of a kind of willful, I'm not technophobic, but I'm not totally that interested in that at this moment. I mean, maybe I'll become interested in digital again, but I still love like that. I don't color correct. I just things, this is the miracle of the science of this camera. Like, this is the picture I got.
Yeah, yeah. I love this picture too. And I mean, this is one of the ones where sort of you can see the echoes of color through the picture, where sometimes it seems like the formal arrangements are less obvious. And in this one, there are a lot of other things going on too, but there's this pink and green kind of echo through the picture, which is really lovely. Yeah, do you want to say anything about this picture? I really love it.
I really love it too. I guess I'm laughing because the weirdest thing about this picture is or the main picture, the largest picture, is this is a picture of my friend Will's hot pink t-shirt. And something happened. He claims that he doesn't have a green t-shirt, and it had to have been white. Um, and so I'm not sure what kind of alchemy went on, but somehow this t-shirt is green. And yeah, we'll never know.
That's really funny.
Yeah.
Maybe we can go to the next picture. Um, yeah, I love this one too. And again, there's like this little echo of shapes throughout the picture. Where was this? Are all the images from the same place?
Yeah, this past summer, I had a show at Lismore Castle Arts in Waterford, in Ireland, and this show was based on images that were made during a residency the year prior at the
I
castle.
wanted to ask you about that actually. What was that like being in a residency like that in like a completely different environment?
Yeah, I mean, so it was so interesting because, like I had mentioned, doing that first residency 2 years ago, where I had quite a task in front of me to assemble the book, and so every day I would go and I would work in the studio on the book, and then I roam around and go take photos. And then this particular residency in Ireland, I was sort of like the test resident, like maybe the guinea pig. They've their program has been so exciting and beautiful and running for almost 20 years, but they'd never had an artist in residence until last year. And because I had already had like a formal connection to the people who the Lord and the Lady that live in the castle, or that take care of the castle, I was allowed to live in the castle essentially by myself for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And so all of these pictures are from in and around the town. And so every day was just wandering around this like really beautiful, like crazy beautiful small town in Ireland
Amazing.
in spring.
Wow. And I wanted to, let's go to the next picture, because I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the kind of ephemera you use, which is something I really appreciate about the pictures too, that it's kind of, have a paper bag in some of the pictures, and then you have these pictures that show like the back of an image, which I really like because it just seems so kind of playful and I don't know. Yeah, playful is the word I'm looking for. And there's like bits of yarn in a picture and things like that. What's the impetus to include those kinds of things?
I think like when I can't remember, I guess it was actually prior to my first show in Canada, I just like collecting and looking doesn't, always only get concerned with through photography. It's also just like, picking things up around like my former job, like scraps of fabric or, bits of nature, like really beautiful, keeping a leaf inside a book for a long time, or a flattened flower, or like many people I know have got like an extensive, beautiful bag collection.
Yeah.
It just felt like I would use those special things often in gifts or things, and they for me it was like figuring out a way to give them space inside alongside like these other images. And initially they kind of just felt like pauses, like it's like image, 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 and then you can just kind of like pause and kind of like ponder this like moth wing, or just maybe the colors in the moth wing are the same as the colors inside the photograph, or and then I guess in my last show with Canada in 2022, I took it to a whole other kind of idea, and like each of those works had a little bit of something, a little other kind of material inside, either packed into the frame. So it's like a jack box, like when if you took it home and opened it up, but also like a verso, applied to the back of the frame, as a sort of like, echo or something.
It also seems to, or I read it as a little bit in the best way of a kind of a rejection of the kind of preciousness of the fine art world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it makes people who think about having a leaf that's going to biodegrade inside of a frame is, probably a little questionable from an archival standpoint. But I don't know. I think it's like, I think when I encounter other work, when I see artworks that have like preserved or made important these other um, bits of ephemera, I'm always so, I just feel so much for like why that was important to this person, or like what meaning is attached to it, and like so I think the survival of those works is like um is cool, like even no matter what state those pieces, what state those leaves or flowers will be in time, I think it'll still be interesting.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's another aspect of paying attention to small things too, and things that we don't normally sort of think are um, worthy, but they are of being noticed, right?
Yeah, yeah, and like it's an exciting thing. Like I'm still sort of, a lot of this kind of, when I get into like the publication realm, it verges into like graphic design, which I'm also really acutely interested in. And like for the next show, making like a much smaller kind of like process publication, maybe just and including lots of scanned ephemera alongside images, and
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
inside with some like finished artworks. And so those two things are like new for me in like the publication arena, and I'm pretty excited about it.
That's really cool. Can we move to the next image, maybe? Yeah, this one was really interesting to me because of the very obvious sort of geometrical connection between the two images, which doesn't seem to happen all that often in your pieces, that there's such a line connecting, one piece to the next. Yeah. So I read an interview that you did with Ben Estes, if I'm saying his name right.
Yeah.
And he had this really beautiful quote that I just want to read and then follow it with a question. He said, "When I try to imagine a Lee Mary Manning photograph, I sometimes have a hard time actually picturing anything at all. Instead, I imagine a kind of weather or a deep breath." And I thought that was such a beautiful sort of impression of your work. And I was wondering how you yourself would describe the subject matter of your pictures.
um yeah, I mean, it's really funny, like getting more used to answering this question, like, because people are often like, oh well, what kind of photographs do you take, or and I usually just say like everything, everyday life, like anything. Um, and and if I'm being disparaging or something, I'll be like, it's like trash cans, and but yeah, I think it's always really hard to sort of formalize it with a way that I think about what it is, because it can kind of be anything. And then sometimes when I'm asked to answer like what kind of photographs do you, or how do you describe your photographs, it always feels like made up or something.
Yeah.
Hard to yeah, hard to say.
Yeah, yeah. I maybe you should just go with Ben's description.
Yeah.
Um, how did you first get into photography? When did you first kind of pick up a camera? And then after that, sort of when did you decide to kind of embrace the idea of being a photographer in a
Yeah.
fine art kind of a context?
um First, well, firstly, my dad was an artist, and so um looking and image making and paying attention was really a big part of spending time with him. I didn't live with him, but I saw him every other weekend. And so, he had this like interest in like nature photography when I was pretty young. And so seeing, seeing an old Canon analog, I remember like picking it up and it being like a ton, and just, him encouraging me to try it. And then um uh in the 80s, I had a series of like, I had Polaroid cameras, and I had there were all kinds of small, like those little thin, narrow cameras that had the roll of film that looks like a telephone.
Yeah.
One of the cameras I had was a disc camera, and that was crazy. But yeah, just as early as I guess 10, I had my own camera. And funny enough, I found a roll of that film from around like age 11, maybe like a fifth grade field trip. And the pictures were so funny, mostly because many of them looked exactly like images I would take now. Like I had bent down so close to like a geranium in my grandma's yard that it was blurred, like this blurry flower photograph. Yeah, so not haven't changed that much. But in I wasn't really encouraged that much um to pursue the arts. My family was like um really interested in politics. I studied politics. I went into that field really briefly and then moved to San Francisco and sort of centered my life around like other artists and musicians and like a really like beautiful like queer community, and cameras were always around, and artists were always a little intimidating to me. I think, like I thought like in order to become an artist, one would have had to follow this like formal path to studying art. And most of the people that I knew in that arena, had gone that way. And so I felt very much like that's their world and I'm just a fan, and I'm really comfortable being a fan. And that really was a pretty tired strategy by the time, I got into my like 30s, and felt really shy to be seen and put myself out there, to make things and and be in the world like self-identified as an artist. Even though by that time I knew that there were so many there's such a thing as self-taught artists, and yeah, I mean, I think I briefly mentioned it, but I think this idea of I hid in the sort of anonymity of this blog for many years.
Yeah.
And then was slowly kind of like um really, really very gracefully pulled out. Like really, people were so generous, and Jackie Klempe gave me my first show in an apartment in Brooklyn in 2014. And I had a series of shows after that sort of led me to my hopefully forever home at Canada. And yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm leaving out this part where I had this like job for a long time that felt like golden handcuffs,
Yeah.
where I just felt, it helped me move to New York. It was a very mid-level job at
Was this at the Gap?
yeah, I was gonna just make a joke. It was at a small startup called The Gap.
Yeah.
Um, but I worked with so many amazing fashion photographers and creative people and art directors, and I traveled a ton for that job. And that was really like the impetus for even starting the blog, because I was just traveling all the time and being in new places and coming to New York, being sent to New York a lot.
Yeah.
So I moved to New York with that job, and you know, making work and making shows and making publications started at the tail end of that, of having that job. Which was really beautiful because it upset this idea that like making work was gonna like do this thing for me, that was gonna like put clothes on my back or give me, you know, sustenance. It was just like it was very freeing, because I was making the medium bucks at Gap, and I could buy film, and I could pay to rent a studio, and then that crazy kind of benevolent thing happened where I got laid off from that job, and sort of was kicked into just like, you're gonna just try this now. And
Yeah.
it's been like this beautiful, beautiful sort of trust exercise.
I know you weren't a photographer for the Gap, but you do some fashion work now, right?
Yeah, I mean, I really feel like I mean, I would add I would really add fashion as something that actually really influences my work, like just alertness to clothes in general. And so through that, like maybe and my like connection to a lot of people in that world, and have like had really exciting opportunities to like make that kind of work.
Yeah.
Saying yes to it when it comes up has been really fun.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel like it sort of feeds back and forth between?
Absolutely. Yeah, and in fact, I was just having a conversation with my friend who used to write a lot for fashion, about like how those two things feed off of each other, and
Yeah,
just like work in general, like having commercial projects or editorial projects, like where I'm sent to a really beautiful thing that's come out of that is like getting to do editorial work for magazines, which generally means taking portraits of other artists I admire. And now I have this like pretty hefty archive of like portraits of just people doing things now in this time,
yeah, yeah. Maybe we can move to the next picture. Were there, when you were doing your blog and working at the Gap and just sort of taking pictures, but not sort of considering yourself maybe a photographer at that point, were there other artists or photographers that you were looking at and thinking about? Were there particular dancers or poets, who were influencing you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's so many you know, that are like racing through my mind right now, but I'm like, Moira Davy and other photographers that really, obviously like Wolfgang Tillmans, felt like, uh, it felt like oddly though, the sort of juicier, heavier, influences would be like experimental filmmakers like Nathaniel Dorsky, um, or Jonas Mekas, or
Yeah,
Stan Brakhage. But then um, getting to move to New York at the time I did, I'd always had like a relationship to dance, and to specifically like postmodern dance, and like, you know, getting to go and see Yvonne Rainer dance and do talks, and Merce Cunningham was still alive when I moved to New York, and seeing his company and seeing him, just there. I don't know, just those type of people, poets. I mean, yeah, like Alice Notley and Eileen Miles and Tim DeLugos and I could Ben Estes, and I could go on and on, but yeah.
I mean, I feel like all of those things are come through so much to me in your work, because there's so much, I don't know, just there's a lot of gesture. There's a lot of sort of beautiful little shorthand, which is like your work visually reads very much like a poem to me, in terms of the kind of the metaphors and the images that stand in for larger ideas and that kind of thing. It's so yeah, it seems very clear to me that those kind of influences are in your work. And I also wanted to ask you about some of your titles, and maybe we'll move kind of to the last, slowly through to the last slide, because your titles are so great too, and so evocative. And I think it's the last image that has this great, is it music for shattering
Supermarkets.
supermarkets? But we can go through slowly. I don't want to rush through the images, but yeah.
Yeah, I think titling is really like the funnest part to me, and it was a big part of the blog as well. Like each post would have either like a line from a song or a line from a poem, and so I remember actually being like, oh, one of the funnest parts of like making an artwork is going to be like making the title, and it's true. It's such a joy, because it's for me, it's like maybe there's a wink to like something specific in the piece, or maybe it's a wink to like the mood of that time, or song of that period, or that's important to me, or yeah, I mean, if you scroll through to some of the other ones, like it's sort of yeah, it feels a really joyful exercise where I can actually make really like overt meaning, because like in the imagery, and especially in the assemblages, that can be a little oblique, and people can choose their own meaning, and when I attach a title to something, then I'm sort of giving it a little more like, for those that even pay attention to titles. I mean, I certainly get really excited when people title their work, and pay attention to that. So
Yeah.
it gives you more juice to sort of pick apart what's happening in the piece.
Yeah, this was the one, the music for supermarkets. And I wanted to ask you about this one too, because this is kind of unusual in your general body of work, and that it's very specifically laid out, and feels very kind of, again, kind of musical, kind of staccato, kind of, there's something very intentional about the way it's laid out. Do you want to talk about this piece at all?
Yeah, I will. I mean, this is a really funny one. It was made a bit before the last show, and so it was kind of standalone, and I'd had I mean, like I said, with the analog camera, like very occasionally I'll take multiple pictures of something from a couple of different tries, or maybe I'll move back farther or something, and I'd had these lawnmower pictures sort of stuck in this stack of images for a long time, and always dreamed of putting them in this exactly following the row of the clipper.
Yeah.
And Music for Shattering Supermarkets is actually this like British jazz composer. This like really rare album contains this song. It's one of my favorite. Like it's like, evokes like this really beautiful kind of feeling, and it's got this kind of crescendo, and it sort of felt like, that was like a perfect title for this. And it's a bit of a weird one, but when I saw it in the slideshow earlier, I was like, oh, I forgot about this one.
It's great. It's
And
great.
which is great because I like, there's just sort of no end to like I love being able to like try things out, and then I'll kind of forget I tried something out and I can come back to it. And
Well, it's nice because it's like you can see the experimentation happening and the kind of creative process. And it's I don't know, it's nice to see that in someone's work. And is there a like in your pieces, is there kind of a narrative underlying pieces for you, even if it might only be known to you?
um really rarely,
Yeah.
like, I mean, occasionally I think I'm like speaking something, and then mostly it's so intuitive, and it's so almost quick, that
Yeah.
I'm not yeah, I don't want to dictate too much of like what's going on, even to myself. But occasionally there are times where I'm like, this is about this for me.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was interesting 2 summers in a row making these shows that were specific to a place. And so it was really refreshing to work on the November show that had like no more rules. Like there's no time period, there's no place, there's no format. I went away with any kind of uniformity around framing, like the frames are all kind of over the place. And I'm really excited for that, actually, to just sort of keep fucking with my own rules. Pardon my French.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it too. I think this is a good place to maybe open it up for questions if anyone has questions.
Hi, yes. Thank you both so much. This was so wonderful to listen in on. I can't wait. Yeah, this was great. I'll start the questions with Charlie, who has a question. I'll unmute you.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Jean. It's really wonderful listening to the conversation today. Lee, I was curious when you started talking about moving around with your golden handcuff job and getting to travel. And I was wondering along the lines of Jean's questioning about paying attention. And I was curious to hear you talk a little bit about the difference between paying attention in a place that you're familiar with, like wherever your home might be, versus paying attention in places that you don't know very well, and how that feels different with your camera.
Oh yeah, that's such a good question because um it's so much different. And like traveling does this really special thing where like, you know, getting on a plane and then getting it into this metal tube and then getting out on the other side. And, it's like this total shock to your system, like not only physically, but like kind of psychically. And, like the light's different, the smells are different, the buildings are different. Like for me, like it absolutely like kind of like punches up, like I'm way more alert to paying attention. Like I'm interested in like the different sort of graphic material in the street signs and the different road paint and the different recycling bin colors. Like the recycling bins in England are like this really beautiful purple. Like how did they decide that? Like that sort of thing. Like I'm just always way more, yeah, it always really like heightens my awareness and impulse to make images.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Charlie, for that question, and Lee for that answer. We encourage people in the audience to ask questions. We have a link in the chat if you'd like to submit a question. And the second question is from Bridget Donahue, which I will be reading. Bridget says, your photos are such a celebration of life, beauty, and community. This talk made me think about how many of the images do actually process somber feelings, grief, struggle, heartbreak. And yet, as an artist documenting slices of life, we rarely see the camera trained on hard to look at images. I'm curious if those images get shot but edited out, or how you mark or communicate these poetic photos as a witness to a lot of potentially darker themes.
Well, thanks, Bridget. I mean, I think like it's really interesting, like thinking around I guess my mind goes right back to like 2020 and COVID. And I remember during those first few weeks of lockdown, and like communicating with a few other people, and they were like, wow, you must really be like out there making a lot of work. And I was like, wow, I'm actually not, I actually really kind of shut down for those first few weeks where I mean, the images I ended up making were like really intimate, like at home, or like it was a really glorious spring. So it was like focused on like, how much time I spent in parks um, and things like that, even though like there was just like a ton of really heavy stuff that I could have been documenting, like things I saw, like, biking through Central Park and seeing the tents in the park of, just behind the hospitals, and like, things that other photographers very skillfully were able to capture and keep. But I think like, it's not like I didn't want to capture those images, but I ended up capturing the grief in my other way, like the swan with its head down, like the rusty, that piece, genuflect, is very much like, when I mean, when I think of like many of the images in the show in 2022, because they were all mostly from that time period of COVID, like, I mean, I processed a lot of my grief really sort of abstractly through these other ways of capturing my surroundings. But it's also really about like taking pictures of people is so important to me, because I had there was a lot of loss. You get older, and like I think I lost like a few different friends within 1 year. And I remember being at like the third wake in like 6 months or something, and somebody was like, just, oh, it's really important to take pictures of your friends. And it really like struck me, like I'm like creating like this is a personal archive, but it's also just like an archive of like people that like eventually, like, I don't know, like we have this short time on earth, and like it's cool. There's people I have like had relationships with, and I have images, it's like it's really like this beautiful, I'm not sure how on question I am, but yeah, it's really special. That's it.
Thank you so much for the question, Bridget, and thank you, Lee. The next question is from Ty.
Thanks, Magli. Hi, Lee. Thank you so much for this talk today, and thank you, Jean, as well. It's been really, really awesome to hear you guys talk. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about kind of fighting the designer about not having page numbers, or not fighting, but the designer not to have the page numbers. I was wondering how you're thinking about chronology or movement in the book versus the show, because obviously, like, you can remove page numbers, but there's still a certain movement implied in a book, and how you're thinking about that with your exhibitions as well, how you think about movement or creating that choose your own adventure experience in the gallery.
Oops, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, like that, I guess that comes into play like with the installation and with the kind of like the movement of the actual artworks within the space, and the kind of like that's where I really have to contend with, like, oh, if I'm putting this in this much proximity to this, it's kind of telling this story. Or people will ask me like, well, where does the show start, like which part of the room, and I'm like, I have to think about like that. Many people have many different ways of like taking in shows, because I kind of like willfully don't want to prescribe like what that event is like for someone. And don't get me wrong, I like when other artists do. I enjoy being a viewer inside of a book or an artwork where people are like, this is the beginning. Now you've arrived at, the middle, and now this is the conclusion or whatever. But for me, it just, I think because of just my relationship to like the way the works are assembled within themselves, and the way they become so different from the work next door to it, like it really feels like it jumps time to me, and it just makes it very, very open for anyone to kind of like I mean, I really, really love seeing the shows with other people and having them tell me like what came up or what they're seeing, you know. It's fascinating because um things will be caught that I didn't even catch, or it's really nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I sent a quick note to Magli being like, can I follow up? I am wondering, you were talking about your literary influences before, and I'm wondering also if you have any connection with Renee Gladman, because I think your experience of time and untethering the viewer from any forced experience of the work sounds really familiar to that. And then I'll stop.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I love the work. I mean, it's about as much of the relationship as sorry, it got a little loud, but yeah, that's just deep appreciation for that work. Yeah.
Thank you both so much. We're going to close out with a song that Lee chose for us. Do you want to say a little bit about the song, Lee, before I share it?
It just seemed like a good song for today's weather here in New York, and like I'd said, it was the title of the piece that I had sort of forgotten about, and was reminded and went to Google that song and was like, oh yeah, this would be maybe a nice outro. So that's it. Thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you both so much again. This was truly nothing short of amazing. Thank you, Jean, and thank you, Lee. I'd also like to thank Trevor and Annette from Canada for their support in preparing for today's events. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. The Rail has been free and independent for 24 years. A donation directly supports our writers, staff, and operations. Support our work through the link in the chat. And join us Monday at 1 p.m. for a conversation with Andrea Gayer and Ksenia M. Soboleva on the event of Promise of Lightning at Leslie Lohman Museum of Art. And as is Rail tradition, you can now unmute and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lee.
Thank
Thank you, Lee.
Thank you. This was
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jean.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you, Lee. Hi, Charles.
That song at the end was so beautiful. Thank
That
you.
was amazing. Can't wait. Go see the show too, you guys. Make sure to see the show.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you guys in Canada.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, Lee.